Here is a curious fact that most people never think about. The deadliest thing you can do in the Arctic is try too hard. Scientists who study extreme cold survival found that the explorers who fought hardest against the elements, who pushed, strained, and burned their bodies at full throttle, were the ones who never came back. The ones who walked out alive had learned something almost counterintuitive, something I was about to discover the hard way. My breath sounded too loud. That was the first thing I really noticed. Not the cold biting my cheeks, not the ache in my thighs from marching over broken snow, not even the weight of the sled harness digging into my shoulders. It was the sound. Each exhale exploded in my hood like a small animal trying to escape. A harsh, a wet rush of air that didn't belong in all that white stillness. I stopped walking. The snow under my boots gave a soft, dry squeak, then went quiet. The wind was only a thin hiss along the ridge, barely moving the frost on my eyelashes. Above me, the sky was that pale, almost colorless blue the Arctic wears when the sun is too tired to really rise. The world felt like it had been put on pause. Inside that pause, my heart hammered. Too loud, I thought, far too loud. "You're burning fuel," I muttered into my balaclava, my voice sounding thick and slow. For nothing. For most of human history, Arctic exploration was a contest of brute force. Men racing, hauling, conquering, convinced that the cold was an enemy to be overpowered. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that physiologists began measuring what actually happened inside a body pushed to its limit out here. The data was unambiguous: caloric collapse, vasoconstriction failure, core temperature drop. And it was precisely this data that shaped Dr. Kaur's research. The work that ended up in that warm lecture hall, projected onto a screen behind a hibernating bear. Survival in extreme cold, she had said, tapping the slide with a laser pointer, is not a contest of strength. It's a negotiation with your own metabolism. The winners are the ones who can afford to be quiet. Modern cold weather training shifted entirely on the basis of findings like hers, away from push harder and towards something far more precise: the deliberate conservation of every calorie, every heartbeat, every breath. Back then, I'd scribbled her phrase in my notebook like it was poetry: metabolic silence. Now, out here, it was less poetry and more commandment. I loosened my grip on the sled's haul rope and just stood there, letting the harness take the weight. My breath steamed around my face, curling up and freezing on the fur ruff of my parka. I waited, counting heartbeats, until the pounding in my chest slowed from a frantic drum to a softer thud. "In through the nose," I whispered, "out through the mouth. Slow." The air burned going in. It always did. It felt too sharp, like tiny knives scraping my sinuses. But if I gulped it, I'd cough. And coughing meant spasms, and spasms meant wasted energy. So I sipped the air instead, the way Dr. Kaur had taught us in the cold chamber back at the station. And I lifted my head and scanned the horizon. To my right, the land dropped into a wide, white basin, the frozen river I'd been shadowing for hours. To my left, low hills rolled away, their shapes softened by drifted snow. No trees, no rocks big enough to break the wind, just the endless, unblinking white. The GPS, zipped inside my inner pocket to keep the battery from dying, had already told me what my eyes were now confirming. I was still at least 6 hours from the emergency shelter. 6 hours if I kept moving. 6 hours if the wind stayed like this. 6 hours if nothing went wrong. 6 hours is a lot of heartbeats, I said to no one. If you want to apply this to your own life, and I mean truly apply it, not just nod along, here is the mental map. First, notice when you are burning energy on noise. Panic, overthinking, forcing outcomes that aren't ready yet. Then, identify your metabolic leaks. What habits drain you without producing anything real? Finally, practice the discipline of reduction, not laziness, reduction. Do less with more intention. Move like the Arctic fox. 3 deliberate steps, then stillness. It's a skill. It takes repetition. But once you learn it, it changes the way you move through every difficult season of your life. I honestly think this is one of the most misunderstood truths in the world we live in. I look around and I see people, smart, capable people, burning themselves down to ash because they believe that suffering loudly is the same as moving forward. I've been that person. I've confused exhaustion with progress. Out here on the ice, that confusion costs you your life. And I'm convinced it costs people just as much back home, just more slowly and more invisibly. The Arctic taught me that real strength is not the roar, it's the long, quiet burn. Drop an emoji in the comments right now that captures how this idea lands for you. Something you feel in your gut, not something you think you should feel. Just whatever is honest. My own voice sounded strange in the emptiness, like it didn't quite belong to me. The Arctic does that. It strips away everything extra until even your voice feels like clutter. I forced myself to listen, not to my thoughts, not to the fear nudging at the back of my mind, but to the tiny sounds my body was making. The faint crackle of ice crystals on my hood, the whisper of down shifting inside my mittens as I flexed my fingers, the slow creak of the sled runners as they settled deeper into the snow. I needed all of it to be quieter. Okay, I said more calmly than I felt. We do this the way the fox does it. I had watched an Arctic fox once for almost an hour from the station window. It had moved like it was made of whispers. 3 quick steps, then absolute stillness. Nose testing the air. No wasted motion, no dramatic leaps unless it had to. It knew that out here, every twitch had a price. I shrugged out of the harness, letting the sled rest. My shoulders sighed in relief. Carefully, slowly, I crouched down, feeling the pull in my thighs, the tightness in my calves. I knew better than to drop straight to my knees. Sudden movements made you breathe harder, and breathing harder was the enemy. My right boot brushed against something harder than snow. I brushed it free with a gloved hand. Ice, thick and glassy, lay under a thin lid of powder. I could see air bubbles frozen inside like tiny, trapped lungs. The river. Under that ice, water was still moving, slow and dark and alive. It didn't roar or tumble like rivers do in warmer places. It slipped, quiet and patient, obeying the cold's demand for silence. I smiled behind my mask. Even you're whispering, I told it. My thighs started to tremble, the cold seeping through the fabric as I stayed crouched. I straightened carefully, feeling the blood shift in my muscles, a slow, warm wave. I rolled my shoulders once, twice, then stopped before the movement could turn into a shiver. Shivering is your body's alarm bell, I could hear Dr. Kaur saying. It's your muscles burning fuel to make heat. Helpful at first, deadly if you let it run wild. I'd been proud back in training when I could hold off shivering longer than most of the others in the cold tank. I thought it meant I was tougher. I understand now, it just meant I was better at going quiet. I clipped myself back into the harness, feeling the familiar tug at my hips, the pressure across my chest. The sled's weight reminded me of everything I had left. The half bag of food, the fuel canisters, the emergency tent, the sleeping bag that was rated far lower than the temperature out here. Tools, options, little pockets of warmth and life I could trade for time. Time in the Arctic is measured in calories. Small steps, I told myself. Short strides. No heroics. I started walking again, but slower than before. I let the sled glide when the terrain dipped even a little, using gravity instead of my legs. On the small uphills, I leaned forward from the hips, keeping my back straight so my lungs could work without a fight. My world shrank to a simple rhythm. Step, slide, breathe. Step, slide, breathe. Within that rhythm, I kept editing myself. When my shoulders tensed, I relaxed them. When my jaw clenched, I let it go slack behind the balaclava. When my mind started to race ahead, imagining the shelter, the stove, the blessed crackle of a flame, I pulled it back to the exact placement of my next boot print. There was a time in my life when I thought survival meant fighting, pushing, refusing to slow down. Out here, that kind of thinking would kill me. If this idea is shifting something in you right now, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. You probably already have a person in mind, someone running on empty, burning bright and burning fast. This is for them. An hour later, maybe more, maybe less, time is slippery in the cold. I spotted movement on the ridge ahead. I froze, instinctively holding my breath, heart jumping into my throat. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks, snow ghosts swirling along the edge. But then one of the shapes lifted its head, and I saw the curve of a horn, the shaggy outline of a shoulder. Musk oxen, a small herd, maybe 8 or 9, moving slowly, noses to the ground, scraping through the snow for whatever stubborn plants still clung to life under there. They were dark humps against the white, wrapped in long, tangled hair that swayed in the breeze. They didn't see me yet. I stayed absolutely still, not because I was afraid of them. They were usually calm if left alone, but because they were a living lesson right there in front of me. They barely moved. One would take a step, scrape, pause. Another would lower its head, chew, stop. Their sides rose and fell in slow, measured breaths. No panic, no hurry. Their bodies had made a deal with the cold long ago. We will move only as much as we must. I watched them for a long time, letting my own breathing match theirs. In, slow, out, slower. One of the calves lifted its head and stared straight at me. Its muzzle was frosted white, eyes dark and clear. We looked at each other across the frozen air, 2 animals trying to keep their fires low. "I get it," I whispered, the sound barely more than a thought. "I'm trying too." The calf flicked an ear, then turned away, more interested in the patch of lichen its mother was uncovering. The herd shifted, a gentle, creaking movement, and began to drift down the far side of the ridge back into their own quiet. When they were gone, the silence felt different, not empty, but intentional, as if the land itself was saying, "This is how we do things here, no noise, no waste." I started walking again, even more careful now. I could feel the tiredness in my legs, yes, but under it was something else, a strange, calm focus, like when you're holding your breath underwater and you pass the first wave of panic. You stop flailing. You just exist. The wind picked up a little, brushing snow grains across the surface like someone sanding a piece of wood. They hissed around my boots, stinging my exposed skin where my mask had slipped. I let my cheeks burn. I let my nose run inside the mask, ignoring the itch. I let my hands stay where they were on the haul rope, fingers curved just enough to keep a grip, no more. Energy is a currency. Out here, you spend it or you die. And the Arctic doesn't care how strong you are. It only cares how quiet you can be. Somewhere ahead, under all this white, a thin line of metal waited. The emergency shelter, bolted into the rock, stocked with rations and fuel, and a logbook full of other people's fear and relief. I wanted it with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. But wanting was noisy, too. So I took another small step, and another, and another, and I sank deeper into the only strategy that mattered now. Make every part of me, from my muscles to my thoughts, as silent as the snow. The shelter didn't appear all at once. First, there was just a feeling that the ground under my boots had changed. The pull of the sled shifted, a little lighter, a little smoother, as if the snow was thinner here, scraped by wind down to something harder. I stopped and let the rope go slack, listening. Nothing. Just the same soft hiss of blown snow, the same slow drum of my heart, somewhere deep in my chest. I took one more step. My toe hit something that wasn't snow. The sound was tiny, more felt than heard, a dull, flat tap. I crouched down carefully and brushed at the drift in front of me with the back of my glove, metal, cold, unyielding, like the edge of a buried rail. I scraped more, small, controlled movements, until a thin strip of gray appeared, then a corner, then the lip of a step. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. It came out as a shaky cloud that froze on my eyelashes. "There you are," I whispered. I forced myself not to rush. Slowly, I shifted the sled so it lined up with the steps, anchoring it with the snow hook. Each motion was measured. Bend, plant, pull, straighten. No wasted flourishes, no bursts of effort. I moved like the Musk oxen, like the snow itself, letting gravity help whenever it could. When I reached the hatch, it was buried under a hard crust of wind-packed snow. My first instinct was to attack it, to hack and punch and claw my way in. The shelter was right there, warmth, food, rest. The thought roared in my skull like a crowd. I closed my eyes until that roar faded to a murmur. "Quiet," I told myself. "Do it quiet." I took out the small shovel from the sled, my fingers clumsy but deliberate. The first scoop was gentle, the second even more so, as if I were uncovering something fragile instead of steel. I kept the rhythm slow. Scoop, lift, toss, scoop, lift, toss. My breath matched it without me trying. After a while, minutes or hours, it was impossible to tell. The orange paint of the hatch handle appeared, a bright wound in the white. My hands trembled when I reached for it, not from excitement, just from the simple fact that they'd been working too long in the cold. "Easy," I muttered. "No heroics." I leaned my weight into it, not in a sudden jerk, but in a slow, steady pressure, letting the warmth from my hand and the persistence of my body do the work. Metal complained with a low groan, then gave way. The hatch cracked open, a thin line of black appearing like a cut in the world. A breath of trapped air rushed past my face, less brutal than outside, less sharp. It smelled faintly of plastic and dust and old fuel. I climbed down into the tunnel, one rung at a time, feeling each step with my boot before trusting it. The light from outside narrowed above me, then vanished as the hatch swung shut with a heavy, final thud. For the first time in days, the wind was gone. The silence down there was different from the silence on the ice. It wasn't alive, like the snow. It was heavy, stale, like a held breath that had never been let out. My headlamp threw a weak cone of light ahead, catching frost on the walls, a faded sticker with instructions I'd read 100 times in training, a scratched arrow pointing toward the inner door. Almost, I told myself, almost there. The inner door was thick, insulated, painted the same tired orange as the hatch handle. I pressed the latch, pushed, and stepped into the shelter. It was a single room, maybe 3 meters by 4. Bunks on one side, a fold-down table on the other, a small metal stove in the corner with a pipe disappearing into the ceiling. Shelves lined the back wall, stacked with boxes and cans and vacuum-packed meals, all labeled in blocky black letters. I stood just inside the doorway and letting my eyes move over everything without reaching for any of it, because here was the trap. Inside this room was everything my body screamed for. Heat, food, the chance to move freely, to strip off layers and scratch and stretch and collapse. Every instinct I had was yelling, "Now! Do it now!" But instincts don't live long out here, habits do. I closed the door carefully, making sure the seal caught. Then I walked, slowly, to the stove. I didn't rip off my gloves. I didn't tear open fuel packs with my teeth. I moved like I had out there, deliberate, economical, because even in safety, the rules hadn't changed. I was still a finite fire in a world of infinite cold. I knelt by the stove and fed it a small fuel block, then another, then lit them with a match. The flame caught. Blue at first, then orange, licking the metal. I held my hands near it, not too close, letting the heat seep in instead of shocking my skin. "Easy," I whispered to my own fingers as they stung and tingled. "You made it. Don't ruin it now." On the second shelf to the left, I found the logbook. It was thick, its cover stained and curled at the edges. Names and dates were scrawled across the front in different handwritings. I flipped it open somewhere in the middle. Entry after entry. Coordinates, weather notes, short messages. Storm pinned us down. Shelter saved our asses. Thank you, whoever stocked this. 3 days here. Ran out of cards. Invented new game with bottle caps. Still lost. Lost my glove in a crevasse. Thought that was it. It wasn't. Little pieces of other people's fights with this place, all pressed flat between paper and ink. I turned to a blank page and hesitated, pen hovering. What did I want to say? That I was tired? That I'd almost panicked when the hatch wouldn't move? That a baby musk ox had looked at me like it understood exactly what I was doing? Those were all noise. In the end, I wrote, "Shelter reached, energy low but intact. The Arctic doesn't reward strength, it rewards silence. Move slow, think slower, spend nothing you don't need." I signed my name, the letters shaky but legible. When I put the pen down, the quiet in the room felt lighter, not empty, just full of things that no longer needed to be said. Later, after I'd eaten and drunk water that didn't hurt my teeth, I lay on the lower bunk, staring at the ceiling. The thin mattress felt like luxury. My muscles twitched with leftover tension, like they didn't quite believe they could stop. My mind wandered back to the herd on the ridge. Those Musk oxen weren't strong in the way we usually mean it. They weren't racing, they weren't fighting, they weren't burning bright. They were surviving by being almost invisible to the cold, by giving it so little to work with that it mostly passed them by. That was the script here. Not heroics, not big gestures, just a long, steady whisper of a life. I thought of all the times before this trip that I'd pushed myself until I was shaking, proud of how hard I could go. Gyms and stopwatches and people shouting, "Come on, one more rep," as if the world was a competition you could win by being louder than everyone else. Out there on the ice, none of that mattered. Out there, survival was a game you played by not playing, by lowering your voice until your body could barely hear it, by becoming so quiet, metabolically, mentally, that the cold couldn't find enough of you to kill. The stove ticked softly as it expanded, metal adjusting to warmth. Outside, beyond meters of rock and snow and air so cold it could crack metal, the wind kept moving, carving and smoothing and erasing. It would be there tomorrow. And long after my tracks had vanished, I closed my eyes. My breath settled into an easy rhythm, no longer forced, no longer rationed, just enough, not more. In that small, orange-lit room, I carried one clear lesson into the dark. Out here, you don't win by fighting the cold. You last by learning its language. And that language, beneath all the howling wind and cracking ice, is written in one thing only: silence. If what you heard today is already reshaping how you think, about work, about pressure, about how you spend your energy every single day, then you're exactly the kind of person who's ready for the next step. The Survival Mindset Guide goes deeper than any single story can. It's a structured framework built on the same principles you just lived through. Metabolic silence applied to professional life, to decision-making, to the moments when everything is pulling you to fight louder. Subscribe now, and you'll be the first to get it. This one is for the people who are done being loud,